All right, friends. So if you're just joining us, this is a debate between myself and a distributist. He has not shown up yet. I've not heard from him actually. So we'll give him a few minutes, see if he decides to show up. In the interim, we're running Facebook Live as well. So there's some questions a couple of you all have asked. I'll answer those questions while we're waiting for my debate partner. So as you all know, about a month ago, I was diagnosed with strep throat and pneumonia, and was very sick, 102-degree fever, and kind of borderline emergency room stuff. When I went to see a physician about it, I also was diagnosed with the COVID. And so I got antibiotics for the strep, and I got steroids for the pneumonia. They did not prescribe the HCQ for me, the anti-malarial drug that's kind of really popular. So for whatever reasons, they decided they didn't want to do that. And so I took quercetin and vitamin C, tons of vitamin D, all that sort of stuff. Long story short, I'd say I'm about 80 or 90%. I still have a pretty frequent cough. Hopefully that won't be too much of a problem today. And I'm generally still kind of weak. I don't feel, 100% my normal, virile, vigorous, and potent self. But otherwise, I'm up and about, I'm working, I'm doing my thing. And I'm very happy to say that today is my last day in quarantine. So my family and I have all been in quarantine at home. Not been able to go anywhere, do anything, that sort of thing. Been kind of tough, as you might expect, on the family. So I'm doing a lot better, thanks be to God. It is kind of a pain, even now. Still, it's been, probably 30 days since I was exposed. I don't feel great, but very grateful for all of the great medical care that I have received. Okay, so it's 7 minutes after 1. My debate partner has not shown up. I hate to say it, but this has kind of been my experience at par for the course with Distributis. So I'll maybe answer a few more questions. Somebody's asked, did the family have it? How's the family? So I'm convinced that my wife and children had the Wuhan before I did. We had this thing run through the family where kids were sick for a day or 2 or 3. They wanted to sleep all the time. They just didn't feel good, headaches, all that sort of thing. Sarah had a couple of days where she was under the weather. And then I got sick. And, if I did not have strep throat, I'd gotten strep from the baby. Daniel Patrick had strep. It's highly contagious, although adults don't always get it. But I got it from him. So, if I did not have that, if I was not already sick, who knows? The Wuhan may not have been that big of a deal. But anyway, so I think most of the family had it and were exposed to it. We don't know where it came from. We've been doing the social distancing thing. We don't go lots of places. People wear masks where it's required, that sort of thing.
Hello, brother.
Another question here.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Emma, we're getting feedback from somebody. So if you would mute folks, just so we don't get feedback, and then
brother,
if you want to talk to Emma, she can So yeah, it looks like we've got a troll, Emma. So if you have a problem with that muting again, just kick him out. Okay, so where were we? Let's see.
You don't know what you're talking about.
There was another question here. What was this Facebook Live question? Oh, has this changed my mind about masks? Yeah, I've gotten a lot of flack for that. A lot of people who, really uncharitable people who laughed, thought it was funny that I'd gotten sick and so forth. And then wanted to know if I'd changed my mind about anything. No, I haven't changed my mind about the Wuhan or the masks or any of that. I mean, it's a sickness. People get it, right? And for most people, it's not serious. For some people, it is very serious. The the masks that everybody wears, even the N95 masks that the nurses and the doctors wear, they're not capable of stopping below 0.3 microns. And of course, the COVID micron is even smaller. So now, can they stop you from spraying stuff all over the place? Well, of course. But if you're sick, if you're vulnerable, wear the mask. If you have comorbidities and you're going to be vulnerable to the Wuhan, stay away from people. All that stuff makes perfect sense to me. So I haven't changed my mind about any of that. Emma, you got to mute these folks. We'll get too much feedback. Go to the Emma. Go to the security settings, please. You need to change the security settings that allow people to unmute themselves, so that they don't, because we're getting lots of trolls and badly behaved people in here. No surprise, right? When you debate distributists, this kind of thing, frankly, happens. So Emma, see if you can.
I love Trump.
See if you can lock that down, please.
I fucking love Trump. He's my fucking sugar daddy. I suck his dick every day and take it in the ass. Like,
So you just need to.
We go 69 on that shit every fucking day.
Admin again, please.
I pull his hair and then he calls me his little princess. Fuck me in the ass already.
There we go. So. All right, so I think we have taken care of that. And just bear with us, folks. We're just getting rid of the trolls. This happens when you do this kind of stuff. Frankly, when this is kind of par for the course with distributist stuff. So I hate to say it, but that's the reality. Okay, so folks, we're 12 minutes past the time that we had agreed for a debate. My debate partner has not shown up, has not communicated in any way with me. Did not ask to reschedule or anything like that. And you can see we had a lot of abusive behavior in here. So anyway, I don't know what to tell you. I've answered a couple of questions from Facebook Live folks, and don't see any other questions at the moment. Emma, has anybody, are there any questions that I've missed?
Somebody asked, why are so many tribes obsessed with distributism?
Okay, so there was a question, why are so many trads obsessed with distributism? I think that among traditionalists, there is a desire to kind of go back into history, just like turning back, just turning back the clock would be enough, right? It's kind of a false antiquarianism, like everything that's old is better. So I think there's this notion of if it's old, it must be good, or I really like Belloc, he was a smart guy, and so, whatever he said must be good, that kind of thing. I think that there are people who, they look at injustices in the world, or they themselves have been a victim of something, have been badly treated, and they're desperate for solutions, and so they're kind of grasping at solutions, and they hear about this idea where, Belloc and Chesterton had this idea, and they were Catholics, and it's supposed to be a Catholic economic system, and so they just kind of jump to the conclusion that it must be good, without investigating it, without reconciling it with the Catholic faith, let alone with economics or ethics. So I think that there's this this kind of just desire to turn the clock back to previous times. Trads make the mistake not just with economics but with other things. They think, if just everybody went to the traditional mass, right, that would fix things. Well, I've been going to the traditional mass, for 20 years. But guess what? The reality is that every single council father at Vatican II offered the traditional mass. Every single priest in 1960 was offering the traditional mass and saying the traditional breviary. those are the guys that gave us the crisis that we've had for the last 60 years. So just turning back the clock, just going back to the traditional mass or picking up some obscure theory from 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 500 years ago, that's not going to fix things. And so I think the trads are trying to be more socially conscious. They want Christ to reign in every aspect of life, and that's of course the right idea. So then when they stumble along some theory that somebody says is pre-conciliar, they just kind of say, hey, that must be a good thing. And of course, it's not. Pius IX, Leo the 13th were all writing about problems 60 years before the council. I mean, they were writing about modernism long before the council. So they saw deep inside of the church that there were already very serious problems. So this notion that just it's old, it came before the council, therefore it must be good, and we should just go back to it unthinkingly, that's not a Catholic position. I apologize, getting some folks complaining about the chat. Yes, we had some trolls, we had some abusive stuff in the in Zoom. I apologize for that. I've got a host, moderator, trainee. I need to train her a little bit better for next time. Anyway, folks, it's now 1:15, so I don't see any point in kind of just hanging around here. My debate partner didn't debate. I'm not going to make his points for him. Jamie is asking where was it tried, like feudal times? Okay, so it's really clear that Belloc and Chesterton created distributism in the 19-teens, the 1920s. It was their idea, their baby. Chesterton called Belloc the father of distributism, and he certainly originated that name. Now, there are some Catholics who will tell you that this was actually, that Belloc was reviving some ancient form of Catholic economics from, medieval times or something, but that's simply not true. In fact, if you look back 400 or 500 years, the scholastics were drawing on Aristotle, and then the Spanish scholastics, the school of Salamanca, they were promoting free trade kind of ideas. They were not promoting this kind of thinking. So that there are people who, I think they're well-intentioned, but they will look back into time and they will find certain practices here or certain practices there in the Catholic world, and then they'll kind of cobble them all together and say, well, this is how it was, but that's not borne out by the facts. It's pretty clear that Belloc was heavily influenced by Karl Marx and Das Kapital. Chesterton had been a distributist, or had been a socialist before he was a distributist. Marx's ideas from the late 19th century were really overwhelming the world, and there was this desperate attempt. Belloc says that socialism could not be defeated without some sort of Catholic response, and of course he's right about that, but he was wrong with the way he tried to kind of compromise with socialism. He tried to kind of take what he thought was acceptable with Marx's ideas, like his his labor theory ideas that profit was inherently wrong, and other things. He talks about wage slavery and all sorts of stuff that just is really drawn right out of Das Kapital. So I think it was a well-intentioned effort to reconcile somehow socialism with Catholicism, just like liberation theology tried to do. It's kind of the same thing: reconcile Marxist revolutionary idea with Catholic theology. And of course, it's impossible. Victory, you have to fight a war to get to victory, and you can't have peace without victory. And we can see today, whether it's domestic United States politics or whether it's the Catholic Church, you cannot compromise with evil. You have to fight it, right? So you try to compromise with Marx, you're going to lose. You try to compromise with Black Lives Matter and their racist Marxist theology, you're going to lose, right? We've all seen those memes in recent days where people say Black Lives Matter and they still burn down your store, right? Because the revolution eats its children. So anyway, I've given the guy 20 minutes. He's a no-show. I'm not going to keep you on, I guess. There's a couple of questions here. Nick, what asks, what do I think is the best economic system? Well, I think that would be the one that our Lord granted us in the Garden of Eden, right? It would be a free market where our Lord has entrusted to our intellect and will to act morally, justly, and charitably towards others. We know from history that governments only aggravate the situation, whether it's poverty, right? Like the war on poverty in the United States. They took a society that was growing and becoming more affluent and more free and more with higher quality of living in every regard, especially the poor and the minorities. And by instituting a permanent war on poverty, they created a permanent underclass and oppressed those people. And so we know that governments don't have the competency to fix these problems. They only perpetuate them, right? They make them worse. I think that's clear historically. Now, today's debate was supposed to be about the morality of what distributists were proposing. So I don't want to get too far off line. People will sometimes confuse the free market with capitalism. Those are different things, obviously. And I'm somewhat reluctant even to use the word capitalism because it's a pejorative, right? Marx made the whole notion of the capitalistic society and capitalism a pejorative. To use the word is kind of almost to say I'm adopting Marxist ideology. I don't want to do that. But everybody these days talks about capitalism. So certainly capitalism would be better than distributism. I think that's undeniable. You don't have the violations of private property and the natural law there. Pope Leo pretty specifically in Rerum Novarum condemns almost all of the methods that the distributists propose as manifestly unjust. And it's clear to any Christian who knows their commandments that, thou shalt not steal, don't covet thy neighbor's goods. It's almost like the distributists have adopted those things as their methodology. Now, of course, I was hoping to get into all of those points in detail in this debate. That's not going to happen because he's a no-show. I agree, Chuck, that that the Salamancan school is so far superior to what we see with the distributist efforts, the modern distributists, whether it's Belloc and Chesterton from 100 years ago, or whether it's Stork and Pierce and Madai and these other guys, Russell from the Leo Institute. These guys, they're not even in the same league. So. You can't beat the scholastics, right? So to go back to them, I think is kind of a clear advantage. Are there any other questions at this point? I'm inclined just to hang up at this point because I'm just talking to myself. Obviously, he was a no-show. Do distributists even agree on a clear and comprehensive definition of what distributism is? No, they don't. Which makes it a problem, right? To debate distributists because they'll all disagree with one another. But I think that we can, in good conscience, kind of take the sum of what Belloc and Chesterton have created and with goodwill say this is generally what they're trying to do. And that's kind of what I've tried to do to say this is what distributism is. They pretty much all agree on certain things. There has to be a redistribution of property from those who have or have more to those who have or have less, to try and even it out to make everybody a participant in productive property. They pretty much all agree that prices have to be controlled. I think they all agree that wages have to be controlled. So, so you have this situation where the central government has the responsibility to redistribute property, to control and set prices, to control and set wages. And then there's going to have to be a continual reset. Some of them refer to it as like the Jubilee, right? Where every 7 years there's going to be a reset where anybody who's grown too much, has accumulated too much, that's going to have to be redistributed again to those who have less. Those basic concepts, I think that distributists would generally be in agreement, set forth by Belloc and Chesterton, developed by distributists over the last 100 years, advocated by, you know, the leading folks, whether it's Thomas Stork certainly would be in that group, Joseph Pearce, Madai, and of course now we have the folks over at the Leonine Institute. It was one of their comrades that was supposed to be here today to debate, who was a no-show, but I think they would all pretty much agree on those things. Would you agree? Do you think that's what distributism means? Lewis asks, but it didn't work out in the garden. Okay, can you delete that? I'm sorry, we got another troll here. Excuse me. Let's report that guy. All right. Sorry, folks. So what I'm going to do here, because we're getting so much of this, we will bear with me, folks. We will lock the meeting at this point. I think anybody joining in at this point is probably not legit. Okay, so where we Lewis was asking, it didn't work out in the garden. Well, yeah, I mean, Eve screwed things up for everybody, right? And then Adam was too weak to deal with that. So yeah, that's why we have sin and suffering in every aspect in our lives. But we can't embrace immoral, evil actions to try and fix those things. We know what the solution is, right? Lewis, what's the solution to the fall? It is conversion and repentance and the sacraments and an embrace of the example that our Lord gave us to live our lives. That's the solution. The solution is not a materialist revolutionary ideology that says, I don't have enough of what I want, so I'm going to take it from somebody else by force, and then I'm going to ask the state to guarantee that nobody competes with me and to set my prices at a high level so I don't have to maybe work as hard as my neighbor. That's not the solution. That's what Marx proposes, right? It's a materialist solution to our problems. The authentic solution is the acceptance of the social kingship of Christ. Christ is the king in every aspect of our lives, and to evangelize and change hearts and minds so that if you see a rich man and you assume that he's not giving away enough money, that's a problem right from the beginning. If you're going to assume that he's not giving away enough money, you've already violated the rule of charity, because you're bound in charity to assume the best of someone. But let's go back and let's say you know a rich man and you think he's not giving away enough money to charity. Well, your goal is to share the gospel with him. And by your example and by your prayer and your fasting, to convert him so that he then can participate with you and I in the example of Christ of charity. When we use the government to do all these things by force, then we are denying them the opportunity to engage in charitable acts. So that's not the solution, all right? So that's the answer to the question about the garden, is why didn't it work in the garden? Because of sin, of course. Adrian, Fahey is on my list, but I've not read enough of him to answer about that. I know there are a couple of priests who advocate, you know, something close to distributism, and Father Pesch is somebody a priest from the 19th century that a lot of distributists like to talk about, that have some interesting ideas. My concern at this point, because I think on the economic side of things, distributism has been dismantled so thoroughly, I wasn't interested in dealing with the economic errors of those ideas, but the moral errors, because I think a lot of Catholics have been enticed by the idea that, oh, that there's Catholic economics, and of course there is Catholic economics. It's just not distributism. Remember that we can never do evil in the hope of doing good, right? And distributism can't get past the commandments. right? Thou shalt not steal, or thou shalt not covet. It's an inherently covetous ideology, and distributists will respond to that criticism by saying, "Oh, you're a libertarian. You believe in absolute rights, absolute private property rights, and there are no rights before God," and this sort of thing. Well, I'm not a libertarian. I believe in a Catholic confessional state, and I think a monarchy would be the best form of government. So that's kind of the typical straw man that you'll hear about that. But think about this: if you have a right to another man's wages, if you have the right to another man's property, then why did our Lord give us these commandments? I mean, how would the commandment "thou shalt not steal" or "don't covet your neighbor's goods," where would that ever be relevant if, as the distributists say, you have the right to another man's property simply because he has more? It simply is irreconcilable. You don't even have to be a Catholic to recognize the moral errors with what the distributists propose. Now, and I'm doing what I promised I wouldn't do. I'm trying to defend the distributist argument because he was a no-show. What they will say is, "Oh, well, all private property actually belongs to God, and you're just a steward of it." And St. Thomas Aquinas says that a poor person has the rights to the excess of a rich man. Well, it is true that everything belongs to God, and it is true that we are stewards. God made us the stewards. So if you own a little farm, God, it's the divine will that you're the steward of that property. He wants you to dispose of it, and He's given you the free will and the intellect and the reason to dispose of that according to what you believe is the right way. To be a farmer, to lease it out, to sell it, whatever the case may be. If we take that away from you and we assign that prerogative to government, of course, the first problem is it's a violation of the Catholic principle of subsidiarity. But secondly, we already know that the government can't do that, right? I mean, these are the people that run the post office. And the distributists want these people to have power over every economic decision you would ever make as a husband and wife. That's not Catholic, right? So they would invert everything the Catholic Church teaches about private property, about the natural law, about subsidiarity, and they would turn it on its head. That's not compatible with the Catholic religion. And interestingly enough, the Catholic understanding of private property has grown more secure and more strong over the centuries, whereas St. Thomas would say that private property was kind of a construct of the state and of the law. That is to say, your rights to the private property come because the government has given you a piece of paper and you've signed off and it's yours, to the point where now in the 20th century, popes are saying, like Pope Leo said, was that your right to private property is actually part of the natural law, and that what these people, whether you call them socialists, communists, distributists, Marxists, whatever name you apply, obviously the name is irrelevant. It's that the things they propose are inherently immoral. Pope Leo calls what they would do manifestly unjust. He says that your ownership of private property is part of the natural law. So he has grown those rights beyond what St. Thomas was saying they are. So it's gone the opposite direction in the history of the Catholic Church. What the distributists are advocating, kind of a corporatism. I don't mean corporatism in the way that we modern economic people would say. Like a lot of conservatives would say that what we have in the United States is not capitalism, it's corporatism. That is to say, the partnership between big business and big government. That's what I would say corporatism is. A lot of distributists will talk about corporatism in a classic sense, and so that gets very confusing. But so distributists they're going against the trend of the Catholic Church, the church seeing greater and greater rights to private property, greater rights to determine how you dispose of your wages and your properties. And the distributists are kind of going backwards on that in terms of Catholic social teaching. So anyway, I hope that's kind of a long answer, and I'm now 34 minutes into this non-debate. I'm not sure what we're doing. Okay, Lewis is back to asking, Jeff Bezos buying media, Google being able to control what you see. It's crony capitalism. Yeah, I would agree that it's crony capitalism, what we have in the United States. But remember, these massive organizations are only possible because the central government has enabled them. And this exposes another era of distributism. In the last 120 years, we have learned, you and I have learned, that the greatest threat to family, to life, to liberty, to the practice of religion, the greatest threat comes from governments. Whether they're democracies like Hitler's Germany, or whether they're pure communist regimes like Stalin or Mao, these are the greatest threats to religion. Even in the United States, people complain about Bezos or they complain about, Facebook or whatever. These people are not infringing upon your rights. Facebook is private property. So if they decide they don't want to let you in, that's their business. Just like I can decide I don't want to let somebody into my home. Or if I run a business, I can say, hey, if you want to come in here, you got to wear a shirt and shoes. And there's no vulgarity. There's no profanity. I wish we could do that on our Zoom meeting. Again, Emma needs a little remedial training on that. But we see that this trend in private property rights has grown. And so in the United States, what we have is not the free market. I don't even think it's what capitalism would have been known as 120 years ago, right? 40% of the GDP is government, right? And fully 30% of the workforce is government. And people would say, oh, this is unbridled capitalism. It was, okay, well, what would it be if we actually had less of this fascist corporatism? I don't think it's socialism. I think it's more fascist corporatism. So I think that this is another mistake the distributists make, is they will criticize something and then characterize it as something else. So they will criticize this fascist corporatism that we have in the United States and say, oh, that's capitalism. Okay, well, that's certainly not what Pope Leo was thinking about when he talked about capitalism 120 years ago, because none of this existed back then. The federal government in the United States was like 1% of the GDP, right? So it gets into a whole other problem. So I think, when you look at what Belloc and Chesterton were saying, they got it wrong then. They were wrong in the 10s and 20s about what was happening. They were bemoaning, for example, the terrible lifestyles that people were bearing with, that were being sucked into the Industrial Revolution. They were leaving the farms, they were going to the factories, they had these terrible lifestyles, these lives of misery. Well, they were wrong about that, right? The people were leaving the farms because they were starving to death. They could go to the factories and have good work, steady work, indoor work, protected from the elements, consistent work throughout the seasons. Their quality of life went up dramatically. This is all undeniable, of course. So they were wrong then, and then everything they predicted about the future of it, they were wrong about, right? They talked about us becoming wage slaves and just being ground under these totalitarian corporations and stuff. And of course, today in 2020, even the poor in the United States live lives that are vastly better than the kings of 100 years ago. I mean, Chesterton and Belloc couldn't have imagined the quality of life of a poor person in the United States or in England, right? With your smartphones, with on-demand healthcare, with free government housing, with air conditioning, on-demand air conditioning, heat and indoor plumbing, and so much food that we have an obesity epidemic among the poor. I mean, it's extraordinary. So sometimes I really struggle with these distributists of today, because I think, okay, so Belloc and Chesterton, they were wrong. They gave their best shot at it. They came up with a bad idea. They were wrong about what was happening. They were wrong about what was going to happen. But how do you excuse the people of today who advocate these very same policies, who know better? They know it's wrong. They know it's evil. They can look at 120 years of experimentation, and everywhere they try these ideas, there's an aggravation of human suffering and death, a violation of human rights, of property rights, of natural law rights. I'm sorry, we're not supposed to be talking about economics. It's supposed to be the morality of it, but I think it's so inexcusable. It just can't be. it just can't be argued. And frankly, that's why my debate partner didn't show up, because I think he knew he really could not reconcile what he was going to advocate with the Catholic faith. Okay, folks, I'm going to wrap it up here. I don't see any other questions, and we've had 40 minutes of non-debate dialogue. I hope you have a great day. God bless you. Peace be with you.